Welcome to the FarrCast, providing you insight into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It's the 27th day of February. Know what that means? One more day in the month. 28 days in February, and it's gone, and we're going to be in March, and it'll be the last month of the first quarter, and we are tearing through the year, and Donald Trump has been president for 5 weeks. Folks, 5, count them, 5 weeks. I have watched a lot of presidents in my life in Washington, D.C. I have never seen this much activity ever from any president in the first 5 weeks they've been in office. Period. Like what he's doing, don't like what he's doing a lot. He's doing a lot. It's hard to keep track. That's okay, I guess. We're trying to keep up here. Treasuries are holding in, still in that 4.3% 10-year range. Mortgage rates have come down a bit in the past couple of weeks, though applications and volumes have not risen significantly. Some of the big home do-it-yourself stores, the Home Depot and Lowe's, are coming out with good earnings. And everybody then has a bit of a muted forecast. So the trend kind of in a lot of retail is everything's been pretty good, but then it's probably going to be flat for the rest of the year. They expect that the consumer is going to be a bit flat. Consumer in general, I'm going to talk about this later today at the University of Delaware. I'm giving my annual speech on the economic forecast. This year, joining again Pat Harker, president of the Philadelphia Fed, where I'm going to say the consumer's running out of wallet. The savings rate has dropped back in that 3% or slightly below 3% range, and revolving credit is increased enormously. What does it mean? It means that the consumer savings rate is way down, and they're spending a lot of money on credit cards and letting credit card balances increase. And the 90 days past due on credit cards and auto loans also surging. That tells me the consumer doesn't have cash to spend, and the U.S. economy runs on consumer cash, driven 67% by the consumer. We need that money to drive the economy. Could we be seeing a bit of an economic slowdown at a time when tariffs and other things come in? Could this lead to a recession that people have been talking about for years? My answer is it could, and I'm going to talk about that later today. Markets have been resilient. Earnings have been good. The FANG stocks have underperformed this year. They are down still on the year. They are down as a group 10% since March the 14th. Can you believe it? February 14th. Sorry, down wrong month. February 14th, down 10%. So the Chinese blip that we told you we thought was a Chinese blip for the big AI model there, we've talked about it with Uriel. We've talked about it with Polcari. We've talked about it with Lebenthal. We've talked about it with Jenny Harrington. We thought it was a blip. Seems to be a blip. So markets now still strong, still trading near those all-time highs. What do you make of it? What do you do? Where's the risk in markets? Everybody can talk about the good things. How do we keep you safe? We go to Kenny Polcari once again. Bring him in. Hey, call in the cleanup hitter, huh? He's four on our batting list. Here he comes, Kenny Polcari.
Michael, it is a pleasure. And listen, when you said that you were speaking at Delaware with Patty Harker today, I Googled it. It's all over the internet that Michael Farr and Patty Harker are speaking at the University of Delaware today.
All over the internet. It's like they spilled a can of it somewhere, isn't it? Yeah, I know. It's great. It's going to be big. Well, anytime a Fed president actually gives a speech in public or at a university in particular, and Pat Harker was president of the University of Delaware, so he's still very well received there.
Yeah.
He probably will not make any sort of a policy statement, but he does give you a lot of insights year in and year out. And the cool thing about this particular speech this year, and you're going to be able to get copies of it after we give it. They're going to live stream it today, but then you're going to be able to see copies of it afterwards. This is his last year in office. He's a voting member, and it's his last year. So when they term out, they kind of get to say a little bit more.
Right.
They're not as laced up and penned in. So we'll see. Kenny, what do you think about what the stock market's doing? What do you think about the hysteria over Doge and what's going on in Washington? Musk at the meeting yesterday spoke more than the vice president of the United States, and he didn't have a chair at the table. Come on.
Right. I actually think it's been amazing. To your point, you said it in your opening statement about he's been in office now for 5 or 6 weeks. And, during our lifetimes, because you and I have seen as many presidents, right? Considering.
Wait, have we? Because you're older. Have you seen more? I have to think.
Yes, but we've seen as many, and we have not seen action like we've been seeing over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Point blank, just haven't seen it, right? And whether you agree, you don't agree, you can't disagree that there hasn't been action on a number of fronts. And so I like the Doge thing. I know people are, running crazy with it. I actually think it's good to kind of audit and see where we're wasting money, because there's plenty of waste. And so let's figure out where we're wasting it first. So I thought it was also amazing that, they had cameras in there during the first cabinet meeting, showed the room full, showed Elon Musk, having this conversation. I thought it was all very positive. Like, I'm not thinking there's anything negative about what we're seeing out there, right? They're shining a light on it. They're trying to be very transparent about it. Again, like him or not, you can't argue that, he's not out there every day. Either he's giving a press conference and answering questions, he's at the Oval Desk, you see him, he's alive, he's breathing. So I think that's all. I'm
exhausted already. I'm exhausted already. Look, guy's 78 years old. I don't know how he keeps up this schedule. I couldn't keep up that schedule. I'd have no interest in keeping up that schedule.
Right.
Jeez.
Right.
Okay.
But now we got NVIDIA behind us, and you said it, because that was kind of sucking the air out of the room for the last couple of weeks, and people creating so much nervousness and angst because they're worried about, oh my God, what if he disappoints? The market's going to crash, all that stuff.
Okay, Berkshire Hathaway, we saw their numbers too. Their operating earnings surged 71% for Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, in the fourth quarter. And the cash hoard, his cash position, increased more cash. He sold more stock and amassed more cash than almost any other time. He really doesn't explain why. Are you worried about a bear market? Are you worried about a recession? Do you think Buffett is?
No, so I'm not worried about a recession. Am I worried about a correction? I'm not worried about it. I actually kind of wish the market would back off a little bit and correct a little bit, because it hasn't done it. But I'm not worried about a bear market. Now, and I put this in my note, I think on Monday morning after the news came out about Warren Buffett. It's crazy because he's got $300 billion in cash. It's difficult to put that money to work if you can't find opportunity. So unless you're sitting there with $300 billion in your bank account that I don't know of, people should not be creating a plan around what Warren Buffett. Oh my God, he's got so much cash. He's looking for a pullback. That's baloney. The long-term investor needs to stay involved. How do you think he started? He's just over the years, the last 70 years, built this business that's got these investments that are spinning off this amount of money. And so, yeah, did he make some sales? Is he raising cash? Sure he is, because he can't necessarily find an efficient place to put it to work. So he's going to be patient, and he can afford to be patient because the money's not just sitting there. It's still earning 4.5% because it's invested in treasuries, or 4.3%, whatever it is. And so people should not necessarily think that he's sending you this cryptic message like, watch out, the bottom's going to fall out. I don't think he's sending that message at all. He's just saying, look, I got all this cash. I have the great fortune of having all this cash. I just have to wait for an opportunity where I see, meaning him, where he sees an opportunity to put some to work. That's all. But I wouldn't be changing my portfolio. I would not be calling up my advisor, Michael, saying, sell everything because Warren Buffett raised cash. I wouldn't be doing that at all.
I got one of those calls.
I did too. It's amazing.
Yeah, I got one of those calls. Buffett selling, we should sell.
Yeah, 100%. And I said, listen, slow down.
Buffett's
Slow.
following his discipline. Buffett's following his discipline, and Buffett will allow cash to build up if he can't find opportunities. He's a more disciplined. He's a reasonably disciplined seller, but he's a much more disciplined buyer.
Right, but you would do the same thing for your client. If you couldn't find opportunities,
It'll sit in cash.
it'll sit in
Absolutely.
cash. But if you can find opportunities, you find opportunities. For me, for you, for the individual investor.
But to your point too, when you have $300 billion, and by the way, I want to address it because you brought it up, that is more than I have in reserve. That is. I don't want our listeners and viewers to be really concerned. I'm sure they're concerned. But okay. But if you have to invest a $300 billion fund,
Right.
what are you going to buy that can move the needle? Is the other problem. Listen, if you're managing a $100,000 account, a 3% position is $3,000. Okay, $100,000 account, you want to take a 3% position in a stock. If you take 3% positions, you've invested all your money, and that's a concentrated portfolio by Wall Street standards.
Right.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do if you got 300 billion? And that's just the cash, folks. That ain't the market cap. If
That's
you had
right.
to, you've got to find $3 billion chunks. You can't find $100 million chunks. You can't find $500 million chunks. If the $500 million chunk doubles, you don't add 1% to your market cap. This is just your 300 billion in cash. So he has to make big, significant investments, and it's just very hard to do, and they have to be very disciplined. Kenny, give me a final word. We got to go.
Listen.
You're jumping out of your chair there. I can see you.
Listen, and just think about the $15 billion in dividends he's getting just every year just by sitting at with the positions he has. So it just continues to grow. So what I'm going to say, the last thought here is exactly what I said. Do not go building a portfolio based on what something Warren Buffett is doing. Stick to your plan, talk to your advisor, make sure you're well diversified. Don't get yourself in a panic and light your hair on fire if the market kind of corrects and pulls back a little bit. You, as a long-term investor, actually want to see that happen so you can take some of the cash that you're waiting to invest and actually put it to work.
Just to be clear, 15 billion is more than I receive in dividends. Is more than I receive in dividends. I don't know about Kenny, but I think, look, full and fair disclosure. We're all about that transparency stuff here on the FarrCast. Kenny Polcari is the chief market strategist for Slatestone. He's now got his own podcast on Yahoo Finance. It's every week, comes out on Wednesdays. You should listen to Kenny. Thank you so much, Kenny, for being with us. Love you, man. Be good.
Michael, it's always a pleasure. I love you too. And you're coming on my podcast.
If you let me, I'm coming, and he's got a birthday coming up too, folks. We'll celebrate here on the FarrCast. When we come back, we have Dan Mahaffee.
Thanks for being with us this week. Now it's time to go to our political analyst, Dan Mahaffee, and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining us now, Dan Mahaffee, who is the president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, a board member there, scholar at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and senior political analyst on the FarrCast. His most consistent, I think, employment over the past several years. The FarrCast. I mean, he's been with us. He's still with us. Other gigs have come and gone. Welcome back to your most consistent gig, Mahaffee.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's the one that anchors the resume.
Well, and it may anchor the resume, though it does damn little for your checkbook or ours, but we love doing it for our listeners. Okay, Dan, Elon Musk spoke yesterday in the first cabinet meeting more than anybody else in the meeting, including the vice president of the United States. What do we take from that?
Look, I think we see that there's still quite a bit of influence that Elon has in a lot of the internal discussions. You can't ignore him as a player within the administration. Second, though, he's a useful lightning rod for a lot of these more controversial policies. And at the end of the day, in the long run, he could simply be one of those many who have been in Trump's orbit, only to be eventually cast aside when it's time to put the political spotlight elsewhere and say that these ideas, perhaps weren't the president's, say, when things, you hear like the cuts to bird flu, or we accidentally fired all the people who keep an eye on nuclear weapons. All those kind of ready, fire, aim things that come out of Doge, as those headlines grow, and as well as the impact of these cuts are seen as they start to take effect, and you get members of Congress certainly getting an earful in their town halls when they were home. That ultimately that is sort of Elon can be the scapegoat at some point. So there is some use to that. But it still always reminds me of that good comedy movie with Bill Murray. What about Bob? When is he going to get tired of this guest who's just there all the time?
We're going to find out, but it doesn't look like he's tiring. It doesn't look like he's tiring yet. Dan, I'm back in Washington this week, and I have a speech at University of Delaware this afternoon with Pat Harker. We're going to be talking the economic forecast, and you've been kind enough to do that with us in recent years. I wish you were coming this year, and we could have worked that out. It'll be Harker's last year. Hell, it might be my last year doing it. I've done it for about 20 years. Washington is different right now. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I spend my winters living at my house down in Florida, and I get back to Washington from time to time. Washington feels different. And the thing that the country is missing, if you're listening to us around the country, know that there's a different mood. It's as if you lived in Detroit and the auto manufacturers were all having massive layoffs. You talk to the real people who have families and jobs here in Washington, no matter whether their positions haven't been reviewed individually. Okay, they're being laid off in just big chunks of people. Not all of them were doing worthless things for the government. Not all of them. And all of them have an individual life story. So I'm telling you that there is a human toll that isn't appreciated on the nightly news or Good Morning America. It's just not. This is really hard. And these people, when they're out of work, we had someone on the local television this morning, young man, 3 children, only worker only salary worker outside of the home in the family, and he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got to go get a job. I got to do something. I've got wife, 3 kids. I've got a mortgage to pay. This is not easy, and it is upsetting. All right, Dan, we have, in addition to this, what's going on in Washington, D.C., we have an upcoming debt ceiling and CR vote coming. It doesn't look good. You've got people who are getting laid off in Doge. You have a lot of issues going on economically. We have a low savings rate. We have a high credit card balance for everybody. If it is indeed the economy stupid, are we going to get to that point where the economy really starts to get tight for people? Not the overall economy, but how does it feel for the average voter?
Well, again, it's that is, I think, addressed, and some of you've seen the sentiment surveys already starting to turn, and that's merely been on uncertainty, tariffs, layoffs, housing costs. You see those in the inflation numbers as well, and that all fits into that broader voter sentiment question. But also, you have these discussions of what's gone on. You talk about the March 15th budget deadline, which I think is one area we're going to blunder, but you also see the budget proposal put forward that Johnson narrowly got through, but that has significant cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, programs like that, all to pay for tax cuts, and still requiring about another $4 trillion to be added to the debt ceiling. So all of these things are, you're 1, cutting major programs, you're 2, not answering the long-term fiscal situation. So this is creating uncertainty for both Fred and Ethel and for the markets. And I think you see that played out in both. All of this is creating an economic cloud, and you have this feeling around the corner there could be a major a turn or something in sentiment. And I'll leave it up to the market types to say how that would look there. But among voters, you can feel it's a concern, not just for those in federal jobs, particularly as you even see that polled today, 71% of people who voted for Trump oppose those Medicaid cuts. They know people or are themselves reliant on those programs. So it's not a cut or programs that aren't going to have impact even among the people who did support Trump.
Well, and, here's the other thing. This notion of a cut in Washington is really a misnomer because it just simply means they're going to be spending less, right? It doesn't mean they're actually
Yes.
reducing the money. They're just spending less. Medicaid spending is going to increase by 2%.
Right, and let's be clear. What
After this
Johnson
cut.
did, what Johnson did earlier this week was probably one of the biggest accomplishments he has done so far in getting something passed, and it was a two-prong approach of his own whip as well as President Trump's efforts to keep the House in line. But that's just the beginning of the process. This is like saying we've agreed to go on a road trip and you haven't even started driving yet. And mind you, you're going along with the Senate. And if the Senate was a car, they're elderly drivers. They've got one gear in forward, and maybe the rest of the gears are all somehow neutral.
Every time
So,
I think about it, I think about Dad's joke for Florida. What does it mean when you see a Cadillac with its left-hand turn signal on? In Florida, not a damn thing. Doesn't mean a damn thing. They all drive around with a left-hand turn signal on. So
this process is just beginning where there's going to be a lot of the opportunities to pick at the various cuts, the various programs that everyone likes and everyone needs. And again, the problem is that the ultimate solving of this debt cuts, as you say, they're not really cuts. If you want to solve the fiscal situation, everyone's got to eat their vegetables, and no one wins on that tagline.
Well, and Medicaid spending is kind of a big deal. It's a bigger issue, and I also I want to move on, but Medicaid outlays have increased 207% since 2008, and they're up 51% since 2019. Medicaid, not Medicare. Medicaid was established to help the needy and the poor, pregnant women and elderly and disabled, and it has been expanded by degrees that now include able-bodied working-age adults with lower incomes. But other states tap Medicaid for a lot of stuff. California spends Medicaid dollars on activity stipends for art and music lessons for children and club sports. Oregon tapping Medicaid to pay for cooking classes, air conditioners, and many refrigerators. This is kind of a feeding frenzy here, financial feeding frenzy for the Medicaid. There are things that they have to really take a look at closely that have turned into something they were never intended to cover. And we can't get this budget under control. Remember that when you hear about cuts in Washington, ladies and gentlemen, it just means they're not going to increase them as fast. The increases here for Medicare and Medicaid are going to increase 2%. Going to still increase 2%. So Medicaid itself up 2%. All of this in Greg Valliere's letter this morning, just terrific on Medicare, and an article in the Wall Street Journal. So Dan, where does this leave us in the middle of March when we actually get through this continuing resolution? And does the government shut down? Everybody I'm reading says, oh yeah, it's going to shut down. It could be shut down for weeks.
Yeah, I think we do back into a shutdown. The duration becomes a question. And also, how does the political blame game work on this? There are many, I hear, on the Trump orbit, almost in a sense auguring for a shutdown, because it would be an opportunity to show how the programs, some of these you don't need. You can get by without government, and that the battle that is going to be fought around this, and what it appears the contours of it most basically are, is that if you are going to need Democratic support to get this done, Democrats want language in whatever deal that somehow ensures that the president has to spend monies that Congress allocates. So you get into it's a very arcane term in Washington, impoundment. But the idea that the president doesn't have to spend money that Congress allocates is one that many thought was put to rest after Nixon. That basically, if the Congress allocates it, the president has to spend it. That fight is actually going to be reopened over this shutdown, and I think that's why we back into it, because both sides are standing on principle here rather than the idea of the previous ones where it was simply, what deal can we make to keep the lights on?
We're trying right now through whatever cuts or even the rate of cuts and slowing cuts across the board with Doge and Elon Musk. They're still trying just to reduce this rate of deficit spending. We're at $2 trillion now, pretty much in deficit spending. Maybe it's 1.9 something, but we're right close to $2 trillion in deficit spending. Can a slowdown in the rate of deficit spending slow down the pace at which we're spending money we don't have? That's precisely what I mean, and that's precisely what the government's trying to do. If they're wildly successful, will take us from $2 trillion in deficit spending to $1 trillion in deficit spending, and we're still doing deficit spending and adding to the debt. So, Dan, how does this, get your crystal ball, please, how does this end up? Does it shut down, yes or no, and how long does the shutdown last?
It shuts down. I think you look at a multi-week shutdown is where my crystal ball is at now.
Does Mike Johnson keep his job, or is he no longer Speaker when this is over?
Oh, I think he can keep his job, because if he's doing this to stand the ground on the issues that Trump and others want to get through Congress on their agenda, he could be strengthened in some instances by a shutdown.
Washington, too, has a lot of Cadillacs with their turn signals on. It slows traffic inside the Capitol building and outside of the Capitol building. Dan Mahaffee is president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, a scholar for the think tank Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, our senior political analyst. Thank you, Dan, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Michael.
We're going to be right back with Shannon Martin from Bankrate.com. with what's going on in California and the rebuilding, what's happened for the various storms, what's happening to premiums, the pools of insurance funds to actually address these things, and what role the government's going to play when we come back on the FarrCast.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. Thank you for joining us on the FarrCast. And now, back to your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. It's the 27th day of February, almost the end of the second month. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. And as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, and as I always say, we bring you an insider so that we can better understand what's going on in Washington. God help us with that job, right? And around the world politically. That's very difficult too, economically. I'm speaking later today at the University of Delaware with the Federal Reserve President of Philadelphia, Pat Harker. We're going to do the economic forecast. I think this is close to my 20th year, and I've done this with Pat any number of years. This morning, a terrific FarrCast first-time guest, friend of Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. Shannon Martin is a licensed insurance agent, but she's the go-to at Bankrate of all things insurance. University of Louisiana at Lafayette, over 16 years in this industry. As we're taking a look at the California rebuild, as we take a look every year now, what it seems almost every year at hurricane season hitting Florida or the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Alabama, all that area, and the destruction and devastation, how will California rebuild? They've asked for $40 billion from the federal government. Will they be able to rebuild for that? What does insurance cover? Is it going to be a huge burden on the insurance industry? Do they have the money? And will those people who have been paying premiums for so many years get the coverage that they think they had? Shannon Martin, welcome to the FarrCast.
Thank you for having me. What a great introduction.
Well, we're really glad you're here. It's really cool. And ladies and gentlemen, we had a chance to talk to Shannon a bit ahead of time, and I can tell you she's really cool. And I asked her, I said, "Is it okay if I call you like the real deal Flo? I mean, everybody's seen Flo, but you're like the real deal with real chops who gets this stuff. Is that okay?" And
Absolutely. I've probably talked to some of your listeners on the phone and helped them with their policies at one point. So
that's great. That is so cool. By the way, Flo, I think that's a great ad campaign, and I kind of love Flo. And she's one of the most recognized actual TV characters out there. That thing with the emu, I still don't get it, and somehow it just pisses me off every time I see it. I mute the television. I'm like, what are you doing with this? I don't, and of course you remember it, but only because you're irritated at it. Okay, uh, Shannon, would you talk to us a little bit about the devastation in California and what it's going to take to rebuild? Give us the big, high view, 20,000-foot view, and then tell us. Then I want to talk about the experience for those people insured who have to rebuild.
well, for Californians and those who've lost home in the LA wildfires, this has been a historic type of loss. State Farm is one of the biggest carriers within that state. They've kind of maxed out their limit on their policy. They've reached their limit with the reinsurers. Now, right at the start of the year, California had started their new FAIR plan where they were enrolling people to get more affordable home insurance coverage, particularly in wildfires. But part of this plan is that if they reach their limit of payout, that they would then have to add a surcharge to everyone who owns a home in California, whether you're with a FAIR plan or not. They've already reached that limit, so we do know that homeowners are going to get a surcharge or an assessment on their policies going forward. That's going to kind of help rebuild that pot. But as it stands right now, they're still undergoing and reviewing everything to see what these payouts really will be. Now, if you had a home policy, even if you were fully covered and you're going to be fully reimbursed, there might be changes in law and ordinances that can increase your building standards, which is good for your home, but you might not have that coverage unless you pay for an extra endorsement on top of that. So there's a lot of challenges facing those who've lost their homes right now.
Okay, so if when you say that State Farm has reached their reinsurance levels, if I'm a State Farm insured and I've got claims, am I going to get my money from State Farm? Does State Farm go broke? What happens?
State Farm won't grow, they won't go broke, especially on a national level. We're actually still waiting to see what will happen. They applied for emergency rate increase in the state of California. The state said no, that they wanted to take a look at their books to see what was going on, where their money is going. So right now, not just in California, but in the home insurance industry as a whole, we're kind of on a pause looking and reassessing things. I do not think State Farm is going to go broke, but we do need to see how these payouts are going to look for everyone.
If you're a State Farm insured, if I had my policy through State Farm in California, am I going to get paid? Is there a risk I won't get paid?
I don't want to say there's always a risk that you won't get paid because that's not fair. I do very much believe in insurance, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get paid as much as you think you will. There's been a big influx in inflation and the cost to rebuild is higher now. So what if you didn't keep up your level of insurance? What if you think you're covered for $2 million and you're only covered for $1 million? You're stuck on your own for that difference. So it's really going to depend on your policy.
If my policy said that I was covered for $1 million and I have $2 million worth of losses, will they pay me my $1 million or will I get less than the stated coverage because there's some sort of financial inadequacy at State Farm?
In general, you will get paid for what your policy says. There is an 80% co-insurance rule for most carriers where if you're not carrying your policy within that 80% limit of rebuild costs, then you get drastically less coverage for the payout amount. They do kind of a calculation there. With inflation being as high as it was and rebuilding costs being as high as they're going to be, some people may be at that risk. But again, that's going to probably go through the court system because homeowners weren't prepared for inflation to respond the way it was, just like carriers weren't. So it is going to be very messy.
You said something else that interested me. The state of California had a new FAIR plan that was intended to be more affordable, that put some pressure, I guess, or standards on the insurance companies to say you have to provide insurance at these lower costs. Was that unfair to the insurance companies? Did it in any way imperil their balance sheets or risk, given the enormity of this particular event in these wildfires?
Well, is it unfair to the insurance companies? I don't know if I can comment on that really, because I suppose it depends on how you look at it, honestly. People need to be able to insure their homes. Insurance companies have full control basically over whether they want to offer insurance to people or not. But if you don't have adequate insurance, then you're at risk of losing your home because you're not meeting your mortgage requirements. So people need to be able to get insurance somewhere. So what carriers do, they kind of all put money into a pot, and they all help pay for when there's a big loss for these fair plan policies. So whether it's fair or not, I guess it's up to them to judge. But I don't think.
I guess what I'm trying to get to here is, did the state government, in an effort to help its residents, push the insurance companies to lower standards in such a way that it's now creating an untenable financial situation and consequence for the insurance companies? Did the state push them too far and mandate some sort of lower standards that are now coming to bite them in the neck?
What the state did do, kind of as an effort to protect policyholders, is California in particular, has limited how much insurance carriers can increase auto and home rates actually in that state. And so as the cost of insurance and rebuilding gets higher, carriers go to the state to ask to charge more to the policyholders. And California kept saying no for a long time. And that did put insurance companies in a very sticky situation because they weren't charging enough to cover these losses. The flip side of that, from the state side and the policyholder side, is they, of course, feel that they've been paying too much all along anyway. Insurance shouldn't cost as much as it does, but then the price of lumber is the price of lumber. So,
right. Shannon, I see big business get lambasted and skewered on a regular basis. Nobody likes high prices. I don't like high prices.
right.
And you look at the pharmaceutical and drug industry, and they kind of get skewered, saying these people are making too much money. We've seen what's happened in health insurance, and the CEO assassinated in New York over anger at the healthcare insurers. If you then think about what that business is, so if we switch hats and we become the insurance company for a minute, who would do it? Who would insure at certain levels? If you're going to be the insurance company, the whole deal is you've got to spread the risk, right? You're going to take in premiums, offer bigger payouts, but you're going to do it on a case-by-case basis. You don't expect these mass disasters. They happen from time to time while you have this reinsurance. Is there, an environment that is fair or unfair to the insurance companies at this point, that we need to make changes to the insurance industry and the way we look at risk and payments and costs?
Yes, that's actually kind of what we're going through right now. Insurance, with it being a shared risk pool, for me, my thoughts behind it, it always seemed kind of like a utopian idea. We all give a little into a pot, disaster happens, no one person has to shoulder it alone. But in reality, it doesn't actually work like that. We all give a lot, and then we don't necessarily get as much back as what we anticipate. With extreme weather happening more frequently and costing more, in 2023, reinsurers kind of reached their tipping point where they said, okay, we can't always cover these secondary disasters. And they ended up increasing their attachment point to insurance companies. And so basically that just means it takes longer. Insurance companies have to spend more or have a bigger disaster for insurance to kind of kick in, which means the carrier, so State Farm, for an example, is shouldering more of the risk than it was beforehand, which means policyholders then have to pay more for that risk. And then policyholders and carriers are cutting back on certain types of coverages, like wildfire coverage has been carved out of a lot of policies, which means policyholders have to buy a secondary policy and they have to kind of shoulder the burden of risk more than they have before, which really changes what it means to be a homeowner in America. So if carriers really want to have total free reign and decide who they can give policies to, how they're going to rate it, without any controls or interventions to balance it out, that means the conversation of what it means to be a homeowner in this country should probably change.
Okay, my last question. Given the disasters we've seen in Florida and California, is it safe to say we should expect the cost of insuring homes is going to go up, not only in these areas, but across the country?
The cost of home insurance is definitely going to go up pretty much across the country if certain things start happening. So in California and Florida, because of, well, actually, let's isolate California. California, that's a safe answer of a yes. Those rates are going to go up. Everyone in California, give or take, is going to see a rate increase. Florida, the governor actually did say that Citizens is going to have a rate reduction in certain areas of Florida around 6%. But then Citizens also did say that they're going to have a rate increase of around 6%. And then you have that rule where if any other carrier in Florida offers you a policy within 20% of Citizens, that you have to go with another carrier. So I anticipate that people in Florida might see a rate increase there as well. Insurance tries to isolate the disasters and the increases on a state-by-state basis, so they're rating for that state, but it does spill over into other states. So kind of have to wait and see what those other states are going to do. Then we also have the tariffs that are looming, and if those tariffs with Canada and Mexico kick in of 25%, that's going to increase lumber prices and a lot of the bits and pieces that go with insuring a home. So that alone could increase insurance rates as well.
Sounds like the cost of home ownership is going to go up somewhat, certainly new homes in these states for sure, but perhaps even around the country as we look forward. It's just going to take more money. So it doesn't sound like inflation's going away anytime soon.
Right. I don't know what to say of what's going to happen in the future. As of right now, I think we're kind of waiting to see inflation. For January, it was at 3%. In the auto market, auto insurance inflation is only about 3% of the overall picture there. So car insurance inflation isn't really moving inflation, but it's definitely keeping it elevated. So we're all just kind of at a wait and see moment for insurance and inflation for this month anyway.
We're at a wait and see, but we're not waiting to see if prices go down, are we?
No, that's one thing we can pretty much count on is that it's not going to get easier right now.
Yeah, it's funny. Every time I go to the grocery store, I haven't seen prices go down in a while. This is great. Thank you so much for being with us. Shannon Martin, ladies and gentlemen, licensed insurance agent and content writer for Bankrate.com, The Real Deal Flow. Thank you so much, Shannon. This is great.
Thank you.
That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen, as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, bringing you insiders every week so that we can better understand the issues of our day. And oh my God, do we have issues of our day hitting us from all sides and around the world. We hope this one has helped. We'll be back again next week to do it all again. For Harry Jennings, our producer, everybody at Hightower Advisors and Farr Miller in Washington, thanks so much for listening. Please share us on your social media. And in Washington, D.C., I'm Michael Farr. See you next week.
Thanks for being with us on this week's episode of the FarrCast. And thanks to our guest, Kenny Polcari, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest from Bankrate.com, Shannon Martin. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of help here at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. And I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep the emails and messages coming. Join us in coming weeks as our schedule includes special guests Dr. Jay Bryson from Wells Fargo, Joshua Huminski from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and Dr. Jeff Lacker, former president of the Richmond Federal Reserve, as well as others from across the world, bringing you insight into the evolving political, economic, and investing landscape. Until next week, take care, stay safe, stay healthy. It's the FarrCast, Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr, Miller & Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and a CC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr, Miller & Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.